Welcome to episode 18 of the Cycling Europe podcast. In recent episodes of the podcasts, we've moved to a format of one interview per podcast with a person who has an interesting cycling story to tell. And those people have included Timmy Mallet, yes, that Timmy Mallet, Paul Gentle, who unfortunately had to abandon his Spain to Norway cycle because of the coronavirus, a reflective chat with cycling guru Mark Beaumont, and in the last episode, 3 Welsh chaps who are in the middle of a 12-year cycle across Europe at a rate of 1 week of cycling per year. Now, if you're thinking that's a lot of men, you'd be right. But in fairness, we have also recently featured Helen Moat, Anna Hughes and Caroline Burrows in episode 13 and Jess Adoni in episode 12. The recent male domination is not by planning. If you're female or male and have an interesting cycling story to tell, please get in touch by emailing podcast@cyclingeurope.org. That's what Abigail Melton and Lilith Cooper did, and I've arranged to record an interview with them in just a few days' time. Whoever you are, if you've got an interesting cycling story to tell, get in touch. podcast@cyclingeurope.org. Now, this month's guest of the Cycling Europe podcast isn't actually a prolific long-distance cyclist himself. His name is Ed Lancaster, and he works for the European Cyclists Federation, or ECF. His job is to manage and promote the EuroVelo network of cycling routes, and at that point many of your ears will have pricked up. What follows is a guide to everything there is to know about the EuroVelo network. Well, nearly. Welcome to the podcast, Ed.
Thank you.
I met you a couple of years ago when I came to Brussels to visit the ECF on a EuroVelo 5 project, I think it was. But before we talk about the EuroVelos and the ECF, could you just tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do for the ECF, and perhaps how you got to work in Brussels for the European Cyclists Federation in the first place?
Yeah, of course. So for many years, I trained as a town planner, and I was working for local authorities in the southeast of England. And then various changes to the circumstances meant that I came to Brussels and I started looking for opportunities to work. And one of the things I've been working on in the UK had been transport planning in particular. And so I saw the opportunity to work for the European Cyclists Federation. I was very interested in that and the role cycling could play. And I applied, and I was very fortunate that I got the position, because that was 2011, and now all these years later I'm still there. I'm working on really the main areas I first started working on in 2011. It's mainly EuroVelo, which we're obviously going to be talking a lot about today, the European Cycle Route Network. But also I work on some of the advocacy topics, because the European Cyclists Federation is the umbrella body acting on behalf of all the national and regional cycling organisations in Europe. And we're based here in Brussels because one of our main raison d'etre is to influence the European policies to make them more cycle-friendly. So, I also get involved in some of the advocacy topics, lobbying for better bicycle conditions on trains, for example, is one of the topics I work on. But one of the ECF's flagship initiatives is to establish a European Cycle Route Network, and I've been working on that for all these years now.
Now, I'm going to ask you hopefully it's not a trick question, but are you a cyclist, and have you been a cyclist even before your ECF days?
Yeah, I mean, my interest when in the UK is probably similar to a lot of people in the UK. It was more the recreational side of cycling, so something you do on the weekends or when you come home from work. Head off. I used to live in Brighton, so head off up onto the Downs. Since moving to Brussels, it's become far more part of my life, and now it's my mode of transport, taking the kids to school, travelling around for work around the city. It's become my main mode of transport.
Now, your title is Senior Policy Officer, Tourism and Regional Policy, which you've kind of touched on already. Regarding the ECF, I think a lot of people might be confused between the European Cyclists Federation and the European Union. Is there a connection? If so, what is the connection? And how do you get your funding?
So it's a separate organisation. We're an NGO, essentially, as I say, mainly lobbying for better cycling conditions, and we represent the site, as I said, the cycling member groups that are based across Europe and even beyond that a little bit. So our main form of funding comes from the membership fees from our members, but also we receive funding from the cycling industry, because the more people we get on their bikes, obviously the better for them, the more people buying their products. And then the other area, we do get funding from the European Commission. They support our work, both through a sort of an operational grant. They support our operation, because we're promoting sort of sustainable forms of transport, so they're supporting that aspect. And we also get funding, particularly for the EuroVelo work, on specific one-off projects, so 2-3 year projects that we have to apply for, and they've been very helpful for developing the EuroVelo network, again, as we'll probably come on to later.
Well, on that very topic, you mentioned that the EuroVelo network is one of the key planks of what the ECF does. So can you tell us a little bit about the history, how it came about, perhaps for anybody who really has no idea as to what it is? What is the EuroVelo network in itself?
Okay, yeah. So EuroVelo is the long-distance cycle route network. It was established quite a long time ago, early 90s. At that time, you saw the establishment of the first national cycle networks, and UK was one of the first to do that, obviously spearheaded by Sustrans. But also in Denmark, for example, you saw national cycle networks, and I guess it became only a matter of time before people started to put these national networks together and to try and form a European network. Work really began on that in sort of 1995. The first 12 routes were started to be mapped out on a map of Europe. As you can imagine, at that stage, although there were certain countries that had a lead in terms of developing national cycle networks, in large parts of Europe there weren't any national cycle route networks. It was an aspiration, I guess, more than anything at that stage. But in any case, they started mapping out the routes, and it gradually developed from there. As I say, 95, the first map was laid out for 12 routes. 2 years later, it was officially launched. They had an event in Spain to launch the network. It continued all the way through its development. It received support from the EU to help develop it. So the early 2000s, you saw the North Sea cycle route. There was an EU project focusing on the North Sea cycle route, and that was the first sort of long-distance European long-distance cycle route network that was properly developed. It was signposted at that time. And then a later project on EuroVelo 6 from the Atlantic coast all the way to the Black Sea, crossing the whole of Europe. That received some more EU funding, which again helped to support. Every time there was some financial support for a particular route, we used it to develop the network as a whole. Anything we could do for one route, we tried to make it replicable for other routes too. And it kept developing in that way. ECF took over full sort of management of the network 2009, I think it was. And in 2011, we were in a position whereby we could start paying staff to work just on the EuroVelo network. And the team has grown since then. We're now up to 5 or 6 staff members working on EuroVelo. And you see its growth across the continent. Every month we hear new EuroVelo signs going up across Europe. And it's getting more and more growing awareness and more development, and it's really turned into a success story. It's taken a while for us to get where we are now, but we've achieved a lot in that time.
Now, because I've used a few of the EuroVelo network, I've used the EuroVelo 5, the 8, the 1, the 3, and I think I've hopped on and off a few of the others over the course of the last 10 years or so. I remember when I first found the information about the EuroVelo 5 back when I was researching my 2010 trip, and I thought, hey, wow, excellent, all my questions have been answered, somebody's actually done the hard work, somebody's decided where the route is, there'll be fantastic signposts to follow. Actually, in reality, it wasn't like that at all, and I arrived on the continent, and I don't think I ever saw one sign for the EuroVelo 5 between leaving the UK and arriving down in Brindisi. Has that now changed? Now we're 10 years later. Are there a lot more signs out there? Is there a lot more knowledge about the EuroVelo network across Europe, do you think?
Yeah, I hope if you did the journey again now, you'd see a lot more signs. In fact, I know you would see a lot more signs I think most countries along that route have been implementing signs. But the challenge we have, and I say when it was originally mapped out in the 90s, it was very much an aspiration. We're up to 16 Eurovelo routes, and it covers something close to 90,000 kilometers of network. And of course, any network of that size, the conditions are going to change a lot. And it goes from Eurovelo routes that go through the centre of London, where you're going on the cycle highways, to parts on the Finnish-Russian border where hardly anyone cycle, very few people cycle every year. So it's sort of you're on the public road, and in a way you don't need signs there because there are no turn-offs on these roads. So it encompasses a whole range of different conditions. And I think one of the positives we've seen of EuroVelo is that it can act as a flagship development to encourage investments in cycling infrastructure. So in those countries where there was no national cycle network, starting with the EuroVelo network was a good place for many countries to jump on board this idea of developing cycle network. And we see that there's a great example from Budapest, for example, in Hungary, where people started cycling down the Danube. They were cycling in Germany and Austria. They're very well developed cycle routes there. And of course, they wanted to follow the river, so they started cycling down to Budapest. That was the next stop after Vienna, Bratislava, and then on to Budapest. And of course, the city authorities started taking note of these people coming along the river. And so they started investing in this tourism product. People were cycling along the river route. And by putting in good quality infrastructure to serve these tourists, it became useful for the local population. Now the figures suggest that more local people are using EuroVelo 6 as it goes through Budapest than tourists. And the tourists keep on going down the river. So the next stop is Belgrade. There's now pretty good infrastructure all the way down to Belgrade. And I'm sure that will continue. And that sort of is repeated across the EuroVelo network. We see that improvements are taking place. Of course, on a network of 90,000 kilometers, it takes a long time for everything to be at the same level. And maybe we'll never achieve that because it's not necessary to have Dutch-style infrastructure on the Russian-Finnish border. But we are seeing significant improvements, I think, in cycling generally, and I think EuroVelo has played a role in that.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and it kind of answers, I think, the question I'm about to ask you, which is, who is the EuroVelo aimed at? Is it aimed at people like me who have these aspirations of cycling the entire length of one of the routes, or is it aimed more at those local populations who use it for shorter trips, perhaps even their daily commute to and from work?
Yeah, it's for it sounds a bit cliche, but EuroVelo is for everyone. I mean, maybe it's worthwhile highlighting the basic aims are to increase levels of cycling generally. So we're using EuroVelo to spread best practices, particularly in terms of infrastructure, but also the services that can be used to support cyclists. Obviously improve the quality of cycle infrastructure, introduce new target markets to cycling. And to raise the profile of cycling. This is a European network of cycle routes. It puts cycling on the map. And of course, cycling tourism is part of that. And long-distance cycle tourists such as yourself are an important part of our market. Relatively small, I'd say. We got some figures from France indicating it's about 6% of cycle tourists are sort of long-distance cycle tourists. But they can, as the classic case of the Danube I was explaining there, they can often be the sort of the pioneers, if you like, the ones that start breaking down the barriers, start showing that there's a demand for infrastructure in this area. But that's not to say EuroVelo routes can be used for all kinds of people. And as I say, it's not just a touristic product. On a local level, EuroVelo routes can be used for day-to-day mobility. And the percentage share of what type of users use different parts of the network will vary depending on the location.
Could you just explain one thing? I know the answer to this question, but I want you to explain it because it took me, I never figured this out for years and years and years, and I couldn't figure out why there was no EuroVelo 14, EuroVelo 16, and now EuroVelo 18. They don't seem to exist. Can you explain why they don't exist?
Yeah, I think this comes from sort of a numbering convention. I think actually comes from the European road networks, but our numbering system is based on whether the route is east-west or north-south. So north-south routes, we have more of them, and they're odd-numbered. So we're up to EuroVelo 19 because we have more odd numbers. But on east-west routes, they're even-numbered. So we'll come back to it in a moment, but we'll be soon having EuroVelo 14 joining the network, which is but where we're up to in terms of the east-west routes.
Oh, right. Okay, that sounds like an exclusive for my podcast. Brilliant. Because you've added the EuroVelo 19, the Meuse cycle route. It's quite a short one, isn't it? That was added, was it last year or the year before?
Yeah, so we have a process where you can apply to join the network. We're keen to emphasise this is very much a bottom-up approach. General EuroVelo routes are based on national cycle networks. We're not in Brussels. We're no longer coming up with sort of routes and sort of enforcing them to be built on the ground. It's where there's demand on the local level. So every 3 years, our network of national EuroVelo coordinators can apply to either extend existing routes, make major changes to existing routes, or add new routes to the network. The current round, it's just finishing at the moment, the last round. It had 3 applications that went through the process. The first, as you say, EuroVelo 19, the Meuse cycle route, follows the river Meuse or Maas if you're Dutch, through France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. That joined the beginning of last year. The next application was a major extension to EuroVelo 8, which is the Mediterranean route in Turkey. So it connects some major touristic sites in Izmir. And then the third one going through this current round is what will become EuroVelo 14, Waters of Central Europe. It follows, as the name implies, sort of major waterways in Central Europe, in Austria and Hungary. So spas, rivers, and major lakes, Lake Balaton, for example, in Hungary, the big one. It's part one of what will eventually be there'll be a second phase that will take it beyond Budapest to the east, further east into Hungary. And we're excited because, as we were talking earlier, that we don't have as many east-west routes at the moment. So it's an important connection, connecting several existing EuroVelo routes that go east, north-south in this area. So we're very happy with this route, and we think it's going to be a popular one for users too.
And what's it called again?
The Waters of Central Europe.
The Waters of Central Europe, right? Okay. I've always found that the places where the EuroVelo network works best are where the national or the regional government have actually embraced the idea, and they've sometimes rebranded it under their own name. A classic example is things like the Vélodyssée in France, along the west coast of France, which is also branded as the EuroVelo 1, the part of the Atlantic coast route. But I found that in those particular cases, that's where it really works well, and you've got usually a segregated, good quality cycle track over extensive distances. Yeah,
exactly. There are quite a few examples where, EuroVelo 6, I guess, is a classic one. We call it the Atlantic Black Sea, but of course it includes various sections of the Loire Velo in France. Is one of the most developed cycle routes in France. That's part of it. Also, the Danube cycle trail has various different names in the countries through it. The Danube passes through. The EuroVelo branding, if you like, sort of is the overarching name for the route, but it can have distinctive flavours depending on the local country it goes through. And I think we very much encourage that as well.
Now, if I were to put forward an idea for a new EuroVelo route, are there certain criteria that I've got to adhere to in terms of the quality of the route, in terms of where it goes, in terms of perhaps the steepness of the gradient, things like that?
Yeah, the basic criteria is that it should be over 1,000 kilometers. It should involve at least 2 or more countries. And it should, as I say, at this point I made earlier, it should be based on either existing national cycle routes or ones that are planned. National networks, and of course we then have guidance in terms of the type of signposting, the type of infrastructure, the types of gradients that should be avoided. The point we always make is you want the EuroVelo routes to appeal to the widest target groups as possible. So in order to do that, you should be avoiding very steep climbs, should be avoiding taking people off the beaten track that are completely away from supporting services. You should try and make the route as direct as possible. Essentially, the better you make the route, the more people it's going to appeal to, the more people are going to be visiting your location, more people are going to be going into the hotels, restaurants, and the shops and things. So it's beneficial for everyone, the higher quality route that they put forward.
And do you have any statistics as to the number of people who use the network, or perhaps the most popular routes, perhaps how much value it adds to the European economy by having this network in place?
Data on cycling on a European level is pretty challenging generally. That's the first point to say, because not every country collects it. Not every country collects it in the same way. The particular challenge we have for the EuroVelo routes is, of course, they're so long. So how do you assess how many people are cycling from the Nord Cap, in the case of EuroVelo 1, all the way down to the south of Portugal? It's quite hard to do that. And of course, in getting between these 2 points, the EuroVelo routes go through a whole range of circumstances. The point we were making earlier about it, go through the centre of cities. In other places, you're off on the coastline where it's only really going to be cycle tourists using the route. So it's hard to sort of get data that really encompasses how many people are cycling EuroVelo routes per se. What we have data is from some of the countries that have done that have these counters in place and can back them up with user surveys. So I was before this interview, I was just checking some of the data we have. So, for example, EuroVelo 6, the Atlantic Black Coast in Austria, where it follows the Danube, they recorded 770,000 cyclists in 2018. That's, of course, one of the most developed cycle routes in Europe. So that's a very high number. And then also EuroVelo 1, you were talking about in France, they calculate 3.6 million cyclists in 2018, including 65% of which were tourists. So a considerable amount of the cyclists on their route were using it for their day-to-day mobility. It's just emphasizing that point. It's not just for tourists. Again, in France, this EuroVelo 1 example, they calculate that the economic impact is 103 million euros per year, based on the people using EuroVelo 1 in France. So you can multiply these figures out to cover the whole network. The last time that was done in a sort of a academic way was when in 2012, the European Parliament commissioned a study to try and assess the impact of cycle tourism generally in Europe. And it came up with a figure of 44 billion euros every year, if you take into account all types of cycle tourism. So it does have a big impact. It all adds up. And I think it's something that's often underplayed. People don't quite appreciate the economic impact cycle tourism can bring. And there are some great examples where that's happening. And close to home in the UK, it's Ireland, for example. There's the Great Western Greenway, which is a former railway line. It's about 40 kilometres that was converted into a cycle and walking path. It forms part of EuroVelo 1, the Atlantic Coast route. And that's bringing in estimated 7 million euros for the local economy every year. So it can have a big economic impact on the local community.
Is that the Waterford Greenway you're talking about?
No, it's the Great Western Greenway. I know there's quite a few separate greenways in Ireland, and most of them actually form part of the EuroVelo 1 route there.
I went on the Waterford Greenway a couple of years ago. I didn't realise it was part of the EuroVelo network until quite recently, but that is a fantastic route. It just goes all the way from Waterford, heading west, I seem to remember, but it's a cracking route and real top quality cycling infrastructure, and that's a really good example of where it has affected the local economy, because all along the route you've got bike hire places, you've got little cafes that opened, you've got lots of commercial activity that go along with the fact that there is now a good quality walking and cycling route going through that beautiful countryside.
Yeah, we're very keen to show, although infrastructure is obviously important, it's the services around it that's as important, is just as important, and also the marketing and promoting. I mean, you can have the best infrastructure in the world, but if you're not marketing and promoting it to the outside world, people aren't going to come and go on your cycle route. So We try and encourage people to look holistically and not just focus on the infrastructure. Obviously, that is important. But you need to have hotels and restaurants that cater for cyclists, somewhere to lock up your bike at night, somewhere to maybe small repair kits, information about the local cycle routes. The hotels and restaurants similarly have somewhere to lock your bike up. Tourist attractions have something like a bike locker where people can put their bike and their panniers in safe and securely while they look around the tourist attraction. There's some very relatively cheap things that can be done that really make a difference and will encourage cyclists to come. Many countries have things like cycle-friendly service schemes in place. So there's a little logo you can look out for when you're traveling, and you'll know that if you go to that hotel or restaurant or touristic point, that there'll be somewhere you can expect some minimum conditions for cyclists, whether it's somewhere to put your bike or whatever. So the economic impact is, I think, maybe not fully appreciated, and it's something that we work hard to do on the European level. And as you know, money often talks. That's often a good way to get public authorities to invest in cycling infrastructure, is to stress this point.
What kind of support do you, as an organisation, the ECF, what kind of support do you offer to the individual cyclists who want to perhaps head off on one of these routes, either the entire thing or just a section of it?
Yeah, so what we try to do, I mean, there's lots of good information out there, often at a national or regional or even a local level. What we try and do is push people in the right direction. So we're not trying to collect information about 90,000 kilometers of cycle route network and to try and keep that up to date, because that would require a lot of resources to do that. And as we'd argue, it's not even necessary if the information is there. It's just pointing people in the right direction. So on our website, EuroVelo.com, we give an overview, European overview on the network, on cycling in each of the countries and each of the routes, and then general information about each EuroVelo route. But then we try and push people to the relevant national, regional, or local websites where they can find out the detailed information, the tracks about the route, the points of interest you can see along the way, the best maps and guides to use for that area. So we call it our subsidiarity approach to this point.
People quite often contact me because they think I'm an expert when I'm not really an expert, but they contact me and they ask me quite often if I have a GPS track for the routes, or if I know where people can get hold of a GPS track. Do you know if they exist? Do you produce them yourself?
We've been, I mean, as you can imagine, if they're contacting you, they're contacting us as well about this same topic. We're trying to work with the national coordinators to get up-to-date and accurate information. Again, it comes back to this point about how do we keep on top of all the changes that are taking place to the routes on a European level. It's not easy to do that, and that applies equally to GPS tracks as it does to maps and guides. So we're trying to work with our national coordinators to try and find a solution to that, because we understand the interest on that, for particularly people like yourself that are wanting to travel longer distances along the routes cross-border. So there's something we're continuing to look to improve.
Yeah, I've always taken the attitude that for me the EuroVelos are there as kind of guidance, and sometimes I've followed them if I can and I think it's appropriate to do so. But it may be that something looks interesting on a map and I think, I'll head off in that direction. A good example being when I was cycling the EuroVelo 8, and I'd followed it pretty much up until France, but then I wanted to go and climb Mont Ventoux, so I kind of headed a bit further north and rejoined up with the EuroVelo 8 further west in France. So I think I always tell people to take a bit more of a relaxed attitude to following them. I don't think necessarily you have to follow every single twist and turn to benefit from the fact that they exist. It's quite nice to have it there as almost a support blanket, that you know that somebody has at least at some point thought about where this route is going, and at the end of the day you're not going to end up in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, I completely agree with that point, and I think these should be we see the European Cycle Route Network as being the backbone to national, regional, and local cycle routes, and so we encourage our national coordinators to, if there are attractions that are 5-10 kilometers away from the EuroVelo route, you don't necessarily have to redirect the whole EuroVelo route over there to connect it to the network. You can sign it off the EuroVelo route with whether national or local cycle routes. It reminds me of I think one of the benefits of the EuroVelo network it is at the moment is you've got some very high quality cycle routes, very well developed. And we've talked already about the Danube, the EuroVelo one in France, the Loire Velo, the Elbe cycle route in Germany. There's some very well developed. So if you want a EuroVelo 15 in Germany as well, the Rhine cycle route in Germany, Switzerland, and France. If you want well developed cycling routes with good quality supporting infrastructure, they're there. Equally, I think the nice thing about the network as it stands at the moment is if you want something a bit more off the beaten track, you can find parts of the network that aren't that developed yet. Every year we go to a big tourism fair in Berlin, and I remember one year I was there explaining what are the people normally come and ask what are the most developed sections. So I was going through the ones I've just mentioned there. But they said, well, we're not interested in these ones where it's high quality signing. We want to find our own route. We want to, go somewhere where people don't normally go, off the beaten track. So I was able to propose some sections of the EuroVelo 13, the Iron Curtain Trail, where you can certainly find that at the moment. And so I think that's the nice thing about the network at the moment. There's something for everyone.
And your website is quite good in that it gives now quite a detailed route for each of the EuroVelos. It used to be the case that it was all quite difficult to see where exactly it went, but now you can zoom in quite closely on the newly revamped website to actually see more or less pretty accurately where each of the route actually goes.
Yeah, it comes back to the point. Everything is getting more developed across Europe, so we're getting better knowledge, better data, better information about the EuroVelo routes, and they're getting more developed. There are parts that are still not there yet, and so we've tried to indicate on the website where this is essentially it's a planned route at this stage between these 2 points. You're not going to see anything on the ground if you visit these sections, but the general direction is that things are getting more developed and there's more information available, and it's getting easier to plan your cycle trips.
There is, or you as an organisation, you want the EuroVelo to be included in, is it called the TEN project of the European Union?
The EU's main transportation policy is called the TEN-T, the Trans-European Transport Network, and this is the European strategic transportation connections that they want to see developed. And it has a significant budget. It's over €20 billion budget. We've been lobbying for some time now that we think cycling should be included, and the EuroVelo network should be included as the representation, because they have European networks for the motorways, for the inland waterways, for the airlines, the railways. So we think there should be a cycling network. We think that should be the EuroVelo networks included. We were able to achieve last time that references were included to the relevant guidelines, saying that where they overlap the EuroVelo routes with these other transportation networks, they can be included in projects. But we can't at the moment be standalone. You can't have a standalone cycling project. So we continue to, that's one of our continuing lobbying goals, is that TEN-T is fully recognised as being one of the TEN-T networks.
What would you class as the biggest successes of the EuroVelo network, and likewise, where has it perhaps not gone so well?
I think we've achieved a lot. You look at where we were even 10 years ago, it was at that stage, it was essentially lines on a map. There were some good examples of some routes that have been featured in EU projects. Now there aren't many EU countries left where there are no EuroVelo signs at all. So we've achieved a lot both on the ground in terms of wider recognition. And yeah, the EuroVelo routes form part of national cycle networks in a lot of EU countries now. But that's not to say there's a lot more still to do. Your experiences about cycling EuroVelo 5 10 years ago, for EuroVelo 5, I'm sure they would have changed now, but that's not the case with all the EuroVelo routes. There are still EuroVelo routes where a lot more work does need to be done. Yeah, so we're not resting on our laurels. We appreciate there's a lot more work we need to do with the national partners to develop as again, it goes back to this point, to develop cycling generally. I mean, EuroVelo is part of increasing levels of cycling. That's what we want to achieve. And at the moment, cycling can do a lot more, play a bigger role. And I think it connects a little bit to what we're seeing at the moment under the coronavirus, the impact of that. We're seeing that cities are turning to cycling as being a solution, and we hope to try and make that more permanent going forward. It can have a much bigger role to play than it currently is playing in the continent's transportation plans.
Are there any particular countries where they really are standout examples of how to embrace the whole EuroVelo project and run with it? Are there any individual countries who you think, yes, God, I wish they were all like that?
Well, it's not easy to pick out one or two. As I say, ECF coordinates the network on the European level, and we have now 23 national EuroVelo coordinators or coordination centres. So the idea is that we have bodies working on a national level to develop the national cycle networks, and the EuroVelo routes form part of that. And as I say, we have achieved that in 23. I think the best examples are where those national EuroVelo coordination centres are able to bring together all the stakeholders in developing the networks, whether that's the relevant transport ministries, the tourism ministries, the relevant regional authorities, the cycling member advocacy groups, because they represent the users, public transport authorities, other tourism sector, the hotels, etc. So we can see in places like Switzerland and the Netherlands, in France, they have been able to bring together all these different sectors together in creating these coordination centres. And we have, it's not just those. In Denmark, Slovenia, we had a successful application from Slovenia this year. So there are increasingly, more examples of these kind of coordination centres being established, and it gives us a lot of optimism for the future.
Did Brexit have any impact on the work that you do, or the influence that Britain has within the ECF? I know the ECF is not the EU, but did Brexit, or might in the future Brexit, have an impact on the UK and its involvement in the EuroVelo project?
I hope not. As you say, there's no. It's not an EU only network. It goes through 40 different countries, so well beyond the 27 member states of the EU. So it goes to Switzerland, Russia, Ukraine. It's not limited just by the EU borders. And we hope that UK will continue to play a leading role. As I say, they were the founders, one of the founding bodies that set up the EuroVelo network. Phil Insole, who was working for Sustrans at that time, still a member of our EuroVelo Council. So we hope that UK will continue to play a leading role in that.
Currently, obviously, we're suffering from the coronavirus situation. We're all told not to exercise apart from our permitted local exercise, and I think further south in Europe, in Spain and Italy, people have actually been quite restricted in terms of using their bikes full stop. What long-term impact do you think this coronavirus situation might have upon long-distance tourism in terms of cycling across the continent?
Ooh, well, it's an interesting topic. As you imagine, we're talking about that a lot internally at the moment, also with the national EuroVelo coordinators and the coordination centres, because the situation does change from country to country. As you say, in Italy and Spain, they've stopped cycling at the moment, but in other countries, in fact, it's been the opposite. We've seen levels of cycling increase quite significantly, and we hope that out of this obviously a terrible situation, we can see a positive change in terms of transportation patterns, and that cities are at the moment increasing cycle lanes. We've seen public hire schemes offering their services for free, particularly for key workers. So there's been some positive changes in terms of, and growing awareness in terms of the positive impact cycling can have. And to go back to the earlier point, that air quality's never been better in many European countries. Health in general can be improved. People will be going out and doing their daily exercise as part of the new regime, and including cycling as part of that. So I think cycling at the moment is receiving a lot of attention, and it's important that it maintains that going through as we start to exit the current situation. I know there's a lot of discussion about how that will work, but it's important that we everyone doesn't jump into their motor cars as soon as things get locked down because they're worried about using public transport or something like that. I think this is the time to embrace new behaviours and new travel patterns. And cycling can play a big role in that. In terms of the impact on cycle tourism, that's an interesting one. I think we'll have to see how it pans out this year. But I guess a lot of people will probably be taking domestic trips, depending on how each country rolls out their exit strategies. So I think a lot of people may be taking cycle tourism holidays in their own country and exploring the networks that they have there. And we'll have to see. I think cycle tourism, as you can imagine, I think it's the future in terms of how tourism can work. It's sustainable. You support local SMEs, local communities. You get to visit off the beaten track places, so you're not necessarily visiting these overcrowded city centres. It has a lot of benefits, and I think that, as I say, it's a terrible situation, but maybe something good can come of it in terms of cycling, at least.
In the spring of 2020, what is currently on your desk as projects that you're working with regarding the EuroVelo network?
Yeah, we currently have some ongoing EU-funded projects. So we have a project related to EuroVelo 1, the Atlantic Coast Route, which is still ongoing. We have a project related to EuroVelo 8, Mediterranean Cycle Route. Obviously, you know well. So we've been working on that. That's coming to an end in the summer. So we've been working for 3 years on that with partners along the route. And as I think I said right at the beginning of this talk, that we try and wherever possible develop tools that can be applied for the other routes as well. So if we're developing something in the frame of a particular project related to one EuroVelo route, we try and ensure that it can be replicable for the other routes too. So, for example, on the EuroVelo 1 project, we're doing some very good work in terms of the monitoring data, so how we can use data from these counters located on the route to calculate how many people are using the EuroVelo routes and applying that along the whole route, not just the location where the data's been recorded. And hopefully, if we can establish a good methodology to also identify the economic impact of cycle tourism, and then establish sort of a European platform for this kind of data, for collecting this monitoring data on the users of the route. So that's keeping us busy. We have those two projects. There's the ongoing work in terms of developing the network generally. We're always trying to improve our communication tools, the guidance we prepare, and obviously the information we give to people the users that want to cycle the routes. And we're planning. The work still goes on. There's lots to be done. As I say, the network is improving all the time, but there's still lots more that we need to do.
If I look back over the 10, 11 years that I've been conscious of the fact that these things exist, the EuroVelo routes exist, I've seen, just as an outsider, I've seen big changes, additional routes, better knowledge of routes, wider availability of detailed route maps, for example, as well as signage on the ground itself. So that's in the last 10 years. Looking forward to the next 10 years, to say 2030, how do you think the EuroVelo network will look in 2030, and what will have changed for the better?
Yeah, interestingly, we're currently putting together the EuroVelo strategy for 2030. So we are looking at this period. I think our focus is going to be on improving quality rather than quantity for its own sake. So looking at trying to improve the existing quality of the network. We're trying to redress, there are some geographical imbalances. If you do look at the EuroVelo route network map, you'll see that there are some sections that are starting to look a little bit like a spaghetti junction, where other sections there aren't many EuroVelo routes. So I think we'll be working with, again, always with the national and regional bodies to try and redress these geographical imbalances where they exist. But I think the focus for the next 10 years will be quality. This point about having much better data, because it makes the situation so much easier in terms of advocating for more investments and getting more support. So trying to improve our monitoring work. And the supporting services, as I say, it's not always not just the infrastructure, it's the services that go with it. So, for example, making it easier for people if they want to take their own bikes with them to the south of France and then come back, cycle along EuroVelo 8 and then come back via Italy, that they can take their bikes on the public transport and not have to fly down to the start and end their journey. So, yeah, there's lots of things we want to improve. And I'm building on, as you say, the tremendous work that's gone on in the last 10 years or so.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the train thing. You actually also mentioned it when you were describing what your job is in terms of encouraging people or train companies to make accommodation on their trains for bikes, because I think that is one of the main gripes of, certainly here in Britain, it's a big problem actually getting your bike on a train. There are some far better examples in places like Germany. I think I've seen pictures of whole carriages of trains which have been given over to bike storage. And even I was in Spain and Portugal last August and September, and although they didn't have carriages dedicated for bikes, they did have ample space for you to put your bike on the train, and that's rarely the case here in Britain. What can you reasonably do to encourage those train companies to see cyclists and long distance cycling as a potential asset for their company, a potential moneymaker?
Yeah, I mean, the situation, it's not just the UK where the situation is pretty tricky. And in general, the situation tends to be okay on the regional local trains. And you see, examples there you're mentioning, that in Germany, some of the regional trains there, they give the whole bottom floor of one of their double-decker carriages to bicycles. Perhaps the most developed situation is they have a bike train that goes along the Loire in France or in the summer months. So you can jump on and off with your bike onto this dedicated train. So there are some great examples. The challenge we see particularly is the long distance cross-border, particularly the high-speed connections, where in some cases there's no bicycle carriage at the moment. And so, yeah, it's an ongoing lobbying goal of ours to try and work with the train companies, because at the moment the EU regulation doesn't require them to do it, or at least it gives them ample opportunity not to provide it if the current rolling stock doesn't allow it. So we try and encourage them to see the benefits of encouraging this, because I'm sure thousands of Dutch people would like to come and cycle on the south of France with their bikes, but if it takes them 4 or 5 different train connections to get down there, then they're either going to fly there or take or even drive down there, take less sustainable modes. So it's trying to work with the train companies, and as I say, it's not just a British issue. We're coming across this in many countries, and try and get them to see the potential that exists.
Yeah, I think of cyclists, we're actually quite used to travelling slow. We don't necessarily want to get on a TGV. And again, being in Spain last year was a really good example. They're called media trains, the ones of medium distance, and you can hop from place to place. They've got ample storage for bikes. It's when you can't manage to do that, and when you feel as though when you arrive at a train station, and this sadly happens frequently here in Britain, and the people look at you or they make excuses as to why you can't get on that train, or they put hurdles in your way, you've got to book 24 hours in advance, etc., etc. And it's I think in Britain it's a mindset. The train companies see cyclists as a necessary evil, well, perhaps even not a necessary evil, just an inconvenience. And I think it's a real shame. Even brand new trains, like the trains that the new high-speed trains, the amount of storage that they've got is pitifully small compared to what it needs to be. And you do feel as though they've been designed by somebody who's clearly never got on a bicycle in their entire lives. Anyway, I'm kind of beginning to rant there, so...
You're not. UK's not alone in this situation. There'll be cyclists in other countries who have similar views. Is what you're saying.
Okay, well that kind of makes me feel a bit better. It makes me feel a bit more European on a kind of a grumpy cyclist level. Right, one final question really, and this is more about you personally. If I were to say to you, right, Ed, you've got 2 months off work, you're going to take a sabbatical, and you're going to have to go on one of the EuroVelo routes from beginning to end, which one would you choose and why?
Oh, that's a good question. I think EuroVelo 10, the Baltic Sea cycle route. We've just come to the end of another one of these EU projects that focused on the southern end, so Germany, Poland, and Denmark. As part of the project meetings and things, I got to cycle little segments of it. But I'd like to see the whole thing, particularly because it's a very diverse route. That's something like 7,000 kilometers. You go to places St. Petersburg, Copenhagen, Lubeck, some quite big, Gdansk, some quite big, interesting cities. But also, it would take you quite far up north, where you really are off the beaten track. So I think it would encompass a whole range of different things, and having the Baltic Sea as sort of the point at which you're circulating around, I think it would be an interesting angle. Something, I'd like to explore that.
I can see.
I was going to say that's not to say I'm not interested in the other ones.
You're
if I should choose one right now.
You're too diplomatic. Now I'm just looking at the map actually, and that is an attractive one to do. It's cycling. I experienced cycling in Scandinavia when I went to Nordkapp back in 2015, and it's a great place to cycle. You don't have the level of cycling infrastructure that you have in places like the Netherlands and Belgium, but it is just a nice place to cycle. It's quiet. People seem fairly respectful of cyclists. The countryside is very remote in places, but a very civilised place. Security, not a problem. So yeah, I can see the advantage. I can see the attractions of the Baltic Sea cycle route. Perhaps I should put it on my list.
And you have one in mind for your next adventure? You were going to looking at one outside Europe, no?
Well, yes, I was. My plan was to do Japan, but that kind of went to pot.
Japan.
Obviously, with the coronavirus, and I had to cancel my plans to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to do that in the future, but as to whether it will happen, I'm not too sure. I am kind of now thinking about Europe again for this summer, because I think come July, August time, perhaps a little bit of September, I'm pretty confident that we will be back to travelling or able to travel across the continent. Perhaps there might be some restrictions, but as to where I will go, it's a big continent and there's lots of places I've never visited. I'm now feeling in the same position that I put you in a few seconds ago. I'm tempted to say somewhere perhaps Eastern Europe, because I don't really know places like Poland and the Baltic states. So perhaps I'm going to agree with you. I'm going to be boring. I'm going to agree with you that the Baltic Sea route might be the one to go for.
Okay. We've just had we were contacted by a German cyclist who'd cycled the whole route and has written an article for us. So you can have a look at their website maybe for some inspiration on our website next month for some inspiration on that.
Yeah, in fact, you do. Your website is quite good for those kind of articles. People who've done various routes, and there are some interesting articles on there. I've certainly read them in the past, so I'll look that up. Okay, well, thank you for talking to the podcast today. I think people who are both familiar and unfamiliar with the EuroVelo network will find what you said really, really interesting. And for me, I think the biggest thing about the EuroVelo routes is the fact that they are aspirational in terms of they're not perfect, but they're also quite inspirational. The fact that somebody at some point, at some time, has sat down and thought about, yes, it is possible to cycle from Greece to Portugal. It is possible to cycle from Spain to northern Norway, or all the way around the Atlantic coast or the Baltic Sea. And I think they're a real spark for people's imagination if they want to do something slightly different.
Well, and I'd just like to thank you, Andrew, for the support you've given us with your books and your social media and your podcast and everything. It's been very helpful in promoting what we're trying to achieve. I think you recognise the success. We're going back to that point about the successes and failures. I think you recognise where we are at the moment, and I think you've embraced that. So thank you for your help.
No, well, thank you for helping to develop these. This is turning into a bit of a love-in, but there we go. Thank you for all the work that you do, and hopefully I'll get a chance to meet up with you again. If I'm coming through Brussels at some point, I will definitely give you a bell and come knocking on your door, although probably keeping 2 meters distance at the moment. But anyway, there we go. So thank you for talking.
You're always welcome.
Stay safe and pass my regards to all your colleagues at the ECF. That was really interesting.
I will do. Thanks, Andrew.